I would like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure what will happen to tenants who no longer meet the criteria for public sector housing as a result of the review at the end of their 5-year tenancy.
Minister to reply, Mr Harmer.
Thank you, Mr President. I can advise the honourable member that in the event, upon review, an existing tenant exceeds the financial threshold and therefore no longer meets the eligibility criteria for public sector housing, then subject to particular circumstances of the tenant, the tenancy will be allowed to expire and no new tenancy will be granted. However, in the event that the income of the tenant of their spousal partner is above the prevailing eligibility criteria for access to public sector housing but is below the maximum upper threshold, the tenancy can be renewed for a further 5 years on different terms at a higher rental level. Tenants who exceed the upper threshold or who do not wish to take up an offer of fixed-term tenancy at the higher rental level will automatically be directed to the assistance available under the shared equity assistance schemes. Alternatively, they can choose the private rental or sales market.
Supplementary, Mr Hooper.
Thank you, Mr President. That's news to me. That's the first I've heard at all about any higher rents or upper thresholds. Can the Minister please advise when this new policy was brought into force?
Minister.
Okay. In terms of this policy is very much a continuation from the resolutions even going back to 2013. But if I just talked about the upper threshold, we'd imagine that this would be currently at £60,000. And in terms of and those that are not at the maximum threshold but are above the eligibility requirement, they will be offered potentially offered to renew their tenancy, but it would be at a mid-rent.
Supplementary, Honourable Member for Onken, Mr Callister.
Thank you, Mr President. I draw the Minister's attention to the Standing Committee of Friday, the 10th of March, in which the Minister outlined this particular policy, and he said it was still at a very early stage and it would require the full consultation with all local authorities should that policy be implemented. So can I ask the Minister, has that consultation taken place with all local authorities and what was the outcome?
Reply, sir.
Thank you. At this point, I'm giving a policy direction where I'm saying we will now be talking to local authorities. The first tenancies come up in 2019. We believe it's quite a relatively small number that will be impacted. We will talk to all local authorities and we will be developing this policy. But what I wanted to do is to give you the direction of travel of where we're going.
Supplementary, Mr Hooper.
Thank you, Mr President. I'm slightly confused here. So are we developing a policy, or do we have a policy? Because in his original answer, the Minister stated we have a policy, which is why I asked when it was implemented, which I didn't get an answer to, by the way. So when was the policy implemented? Or are we now developing a policy in consultation with local authorities?
Minister.
Thank you. I can come back to the member with a date. I'll come back to you specifically on the date. In terms of the policy, we have a policy. What I'm talking about is that consultation that the Honourable Member from Onken was talking about, where we will now start to talk to local authorities for 2019.
Supplementary, Mr Callister.
Thank you, Mr President. I'm also confused on this because in respect of posts made by the Cabinet Minister, he clearly says that Douglas Corporation already has the policy in place and they're going to unveil it when the fixed-term tenancy comes to an end. So, again, can the Minister just clarify that there is no policy currently in place for the ending of the fixed terms, and this is a starting point, and he will engage with honourable members in this court and local authorities in order to put in place the best policy for tenants and the local authorities?
Mr Harmer.
Thank you, Mr President. Sorry, to be clear, there is a policy. That policy will be, we will be talking with local authorities how that is brought in, and we'll be talking to them over the next year because this will start in 2019.
Final supplementary, Mr Hooper.
I wish this wasn't the final one, Mr President. I'm very confused. So we don't have a policy, and yet local authorities have been told there is a policy. They've been told that the implementation of this fixed-term policy is coming in. Training has already been provided to local authorities. So the Minister is really not telling us the same thing that he's telling local authorities. Can I ask him then, seeing as we don't have a policy, and local authorities haven't been told that there is a policy in place, why they were sent a letter on the 26th of September, why there is a department policy document dated the 4th of April, all of which reinforce the view that there is in fact a policy in place, a policy which has not come before this honourable court.
Sorry, you've misunderstood. I said there is a policy, and that policy is being brought forward, and we have been talking and are talking to local authorities, and this will be implemented in 2019.